We know that there are 27 people missing.
A lot of them are scared to let their kids out of the house.
It's our job here in Chowchilla to find these youngsters and the bus driver.
Whoever did it put a great deal of planning and effort and money into this thing, but what their thought was, I don't think we'll know.
The scorching summer sun beat down on the old Dairyland Union school bus as it rumbled down the quiet stretch of Avenue 21 in Chowchilla, California. In the front sat Ed Ray, a well-seasoned driver. The chatter of 26 children filled the air as he was taking the summer school students back home from a day of adventure at the local fairgrounds. The clock was nearing 4 p.m. as the bus made its way past the endless golden fields. Without warning, an unmarked white van was obstructing the road ahead. Ed eased the bus to a halt, his weathered hands now clenched tight on the wheel. The dry summer air grew thick as 3 men, their identities concealed behind pantyhose, emerged from the van. They carried with them sawed-off shotguns, gleaming ominously under the beating sun.
The weapon that was seen by the driver was a sawed-off shotgun.
Ed Ray's heart raced with dread. 2 of the men made their way onto the bus, where they forcefully relieved Ed of his duties, taking the driver's seat. With the men now in charge, the bus started moving again. As the white van trailed close behind, Ed Ray and the children had unknowingly become part of the largest kidnapping for ransom plot in U.S. history, a fate which would find all 27 of them buried alive in a rock quarry, fighting for their lives. The early lives of Rick and Jim Schoenfeld and their friend Fred Woods looked much different than what you might expect based on the terror they would soon unleash. The 3 had grown up together in the affluent suburbs of the San Francisco Bay Area, leading comfortable childhoods funded by their wealthy parents. But after high school, their privileged upbringings gave way to the realities of adulthood. Failed business ventures left the trio falling deeper into debt as they struggled to replicate their family's success. They dreamed of get-rich-quick schemes that might catapult them back to prosperity. Taking inspiration from one of their favorite films, Dirty Harry,
there were a lot of reasons they called him Dirty Harry, and he kept inventing new ones.
the 3 began to muse over the perfect crime. Soon abandoning any legal business ideas, they devoted themselves to plotting the cold-blooded abduction. The target? A school bus full of children from a sleepy, unsuspecting farming community. They knew taking multiple hostages would result in a massive ransom, and the state would pay up for children. By the flickering basement light, the Chowchilla school bus kidnapping was all but set in stone. As the sun sank below the horizon, Carol Marshall felt the first pangs of unease. Her son Mike wasn't normally late getting home. By all means, she would normally pick him up. She had only made him take the bus that particular day as punishment for catching him and a friend drinking some beers the night before. No harm, no foul. Or so she had thought. She glanced anxiously at the clock. Maybe they had just gotten held up somewhere along the way. But as evening turned to dusk, Carol's intuition told her something was wrong. Mike was a dependable kid. He should have been home by now. Calling the school, she soon discovered she wasn't the only parent beginning to worry. Others had already called, asking about their own children. They all knew the driver, Ed Ray, was a long-time, loyal employee who would never be irresponsibly late. The school sent out officials to drive along the bus route, expecting to find them stranded with engine trouble. Yet the school officials found no broken-down bus, and no sign of the children or Ed at all. With alarm growing, the school phoned the police to report the driver and the children missing. Carol and the parents of the other 25 Chowchilla students were entering into their worst nightmare.
It means you have no lead, right?
We have nothing to go on at the present time.
The small farming town of Chowchilla, California, was the kind of quiet, rural community where everyone knew each other and little ever happened. Families enjoyed the safety of raising their kids in a small town. They never thought twice about letting them go out alone, much less with their school. However, by the next morning, Chowchilla's safe, quiet way of life was dismantled as news of the missing children made international headlines. Suddenly, this small town was inundated with media and concerned individuals calling from all over the place. But there was little to report. Police had found the bus the night before, spotting it in a drainage ditch off the road, 8 or 9 miles from town. But the bus was entirely empty. No sign of Ed, the children, nor any foul play. For Chowchilla, it was as if Ed and the 26 children had simply vanished into thin air. As the bus continued its journey out of Chowchilla, a sense of unease settled over Ed and the students. Nightfall was approaching and uncertainty hung in the air. Once outside of town, the masked men directed the bus off the road, out of view from prying eyes. Behind it, the white van pulled up. They forced their captives out of the bus and into the back of the van. The windows had been boarded up, creating an oppressive, sweltering atmosphere in the California heat. They locked the doors, proceeding to load the remaining kids into a second van that they had planted in the area. With the bus now empty and abandoned, the captors left the county, embarking on an 11-hour drive along winding, disorienting roads. Their journey led them approximately 100 miles away to Livermore, California, where one of the men, Fred Wood's father, owned a sprawling quarry. In the early morning hours of July 16th, the white vans entered the quarry, an eerie and desolate place in the darkness. They opened one of the vans, and Ed and the children disembarked, one by one, providing their names and a personal belonging as proof of their captivity. The 3 men then motioned towards the ground. Ed noticed they were pointing to a small rectangular hole in the dirt. With their only alternative being a shotgun, all 27 of them descended the ladder into the depths and hopelessly watched as the hatch was closed and locked behind them. With their hostages now imprisoned underground, Fred, Rick, and Jim decided to move forward with the next step in their scheme, the demand for ransom. They set their sights on a staggering $5 million in exchange for the safe release of the children. Returning home, they prepared to make the call to the local police station to issue their demands. Yet dialing the Chowchilla police station introduced a new problem. Every time they attempted to place the call, they received an incessant busy signal. The small rural town had been overwhelmed by calls pouring in from across the nation. Unsure how to proceed, the men decided to temporarily abandon their efforts and instead sleep. They would regroup when they awoke. However, when they did wake, they were confronted with the harsh new reality that their entire plan was falling apart.
They're all home now in Chowchilla. They're all safe.
12 agonizing hours had passed since Ed and the children were trapped in the dark, sweltering metal chamber. Exhaustion crept over them, and their strength waned with every passing moment. The space had begun to smell as the small toilet holes in the room filled. The air was growing stagnant. The ceiling had begun to sag. The meager food and drink left by their captors was all but gone, and Ed understood that time was running out. Among the captives, the eldest boy and Carol's son, Mike, had had enough. 12 hours of captivity were all he could endure, and he resolved to take action. Ed, Mike, and a few others heaved the mattresses from the room into a stack, forming a teetering column beneath where they'd entered. They realized that something heavy lay above the metal lid, yet they persisted, pushing and shoving relentlessly until they created a small gap. Struggling against the weight, Ed managed to reach through the gap and dislodge the objects, creating a space just large enough for Mike to squeeze through. With his bare hands and the last remnants of strength, Mike dug at the edges. Then, in a final burst of determination, glimpsed an opening. After 16 harrowing hours buried alive, they had emerged into the world above.
The children and the bus driver were all right.
As Fred, Rick, and Jim awoke, they began to grasp the flaws in their scheme. They had never foreseen the possibility of the captives breaking free. Fred had purchased the moving van that they had used as the tomb in his own name, an obvious link back to them. and they had used his father's quarry for the burial site, details they had foolishly overlooked. Rick retreated to his parents' home, while Fred immediately fled for Canada, with Jim making preparations to follow via car with their belongings. Fred managed to fly into Vancouver without issue, but both of Jim's attempts to drive across the border were denied. When the pair learned Rick had turned himself in, Jim lost his nerve and ended up surrendering as well. Fred remained free until he wrote a letter to an old friend in California. He asked the friend to keep their communication quiet, but the letter was promptly handed to the FBI. The Canadian police were made aware, sealing Fred's fate. Within 14 days of the brazen crime, all 3 kidnappers were in custody. Having escaped their prison, Ed and the children ventured cautiously towards a distant light, afraid that their captors might pop up at any time. However, their fortunes soon changed as they encountered 2 quarry workers. The workers were shocked to see a group of children on the site, but they had heard the news. By this point, the world knew their plight. Authorities arrived to transport the exhausted group to a rehabilitation center for medical examinations. In an ill-conceived move, the children were placed on a bus once more, reliving their earlier terror. After a comprehensive examination to address any injuries, ensure their well-being, and collect statements, and 36 hours after their horrifying encounter with the 3 men, the students were finally returned to Chowchilla. They were finally reunited with their parents. Fred, Rick, and Jim were put on trial, once again capturing the nation's attention. All 3 men were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A sentence that would later be modified in 1981 to life with the chance of parole. For the children, the scars ran deep, leaving them with lingering fears and trauma that would persist into their adult lives. In a turn of events, Rick Schoenfeld was set free in 2012, while James Schoenfeld was paroled in 2015. Fred Woods, the last of the 3, eventually secured his parole in 2022.